Good evening. Tonight we are going to discuss the Wheel of the Year. This will only be a very basic introduction to the two different cycles, the cycle of the sun and the cycle of the moon, that pagans and Wiccans honor throughout the year. The Earth has two separate and distinct cycles. Actually, it really has more than that, but for the purposes of this discussion, we'll say just two, just for simplicity's sake. The lunar cycle is the first. This represents the life cycle of the goddess, and it repeats itself approximately once a month, from new moon to new moon, or from full moon to full moon, depending on how you look at it. The moon in all of its phases is symbolic of the three stages of the goddess: the maiden, the mother, and the crone. For those that also honor the warrior aspect of the goddess, she is more appropriately categorized with the maiden for the purposes of honoring the cycles of the moon. This is because both the maiden and the warrior are young, enthusiastic, and full of energy. They have a lot in common, so it makes sense to categorize them together, at least for the purposes of discussing the cycles of the moon. The solar cycle, on the other hand, is the life cycle of the god. He is born at Yule and dies the following so on. There are a total of 8 Sabbats that make up the solar cycle, each representing a different stage of the god's life cycle. He is hero, lover, king, and sorcerer. Both of these cycles are crucial to the Earth's existence. The lunar cycle controls the water, including the waters of the human body, while the solar cycle is the cycle of agriculture. We'll start by discussing the very basic cycles of the moon. Now, there are many phases of the moon. You can look up to that moon and you can see it as full. It might be new. It might be waxing. It might be waning. It might be a quarter moon. There are many, many different phases of the moon. But since this is only a basic introduction, we're only going to discuss the full moon and the new moon. The full moon, in a pagan sense, is a wonderful time for practical magic. This is a good time for general healing and for gathering things to you. As the moon grows full, as it waxes, as it grows larger, this is a time of attraction magic. If you want to draw things to you, you would perform these types of spells and rituals at the full moon or right before the full moon. There are a total of 12 to 13 full moons every year. Each of these moons in most pagan or Wiccan circles has a name. These names vary from tradition to tradition, but they might be things like wolf moon, quiet moon, cold moon. These are all different moons that occur throughout the year. I'm not going to discuss them in depth right now. I am going to discuss them in another video, so stay tuned in the next few weeks as we discuss this. But for right now, just know that the 12 to 13 different moons in the year each have their own name, and they each have their own energy. So because of this, depending on exactly what you wish to accomplish, you may wait for a spell or ritual for a very particular moon. New moons, on the other hand, are exactly the opposite of a full moon. Full moons follow a waning moon when the moon grows smaller. So this is a good time for banishing magics, for pushing things away from you. This is a time of quiet. It's not typically a time for healing magics, but if you are hoping to banish a specific illness or ailment, You might be better off doing this at the new moon instead of at the full moon. The lunar cycle ebbs and flows much like the tides. It repeats itself over and over again, so it is always there when we need it. The solar cycle also repeats. This is the cycle of the seasons, the cycle of agriculture, and it is just as important to us as the cycle of water. The solar cycle represents the cycles of the earth and the seasonal changes that surround us all. As the year is divided into seasons, so the solar cycle is celebrated with seasonal holidays. There are 8 holy days in paganism and in Wicca, and these are appropriately spaced through the year to reflect the changing of the seasons. These holy days are often referred to as Sabbats, and these Sabbats are divided into greater Sabbats and lesser Sabbats. The greater Sabbats are major milestones when the beginning of winter comes, when the beginning of summer comes. And these are not what you might expect if you are unfamiliar with the wheel of the year. You might think that a greater Sabbat would be the winter solstice, as we often call the winter solstice the first day of winter. But really it is midwinter. The first day of winter would be at the very beginning of November. So we have the greater Sabbats that occur to mark the changes of the season. The lesser Sabbats, the solstices and equinoxes, mark the middle of the season. The solstices mark the longest and the shortest days. The equinoxes mark when day and night are exactly equal. In times of old, this solar cycle was incredibly important. It marked the changing of the seasons and told the people when it was time to harvest, when it was time to plant, when it was time to rest. In the coming videos, we will discuss these Sabbats in greater detail, but for now, just know that they are often marked by modern pagans with rituals that are hosted either on these dates or approximately on these dates. Modern life gets in the way sometimes, and we often celebrate these on a slightly removed date. So instead of the solstice, we might celebrate the weekend after. That's all right. Sometimes you just have to deal with modern life. It's all right to move your celebrations. These celebrations are more than just rituals. They're a time of merriment and of feasting. They're not typically a time to perform magics. That's what the lunar cycle days are for. These are for acknowledging the passing of the seasons and the passing of life and death. Thank you for watching. Tune in next time when we discuss the lunar cycle in detail and how modern pagans and Wiccans might go about celebrating it. Blessed be.